My name is Madeline Cross, and 2 weeks ago, my father stood in front of 54 relatives, lifted a glass like he was making a toast, and said he had only one daughter he was proud of while looking straight at my sister Riley, as if I wasn't even in the room. I remember the way the air in that rented hall tightened when he said it. A held breath I couldn't escape. And I remember thinking that if he knew what was sitting in my phone, a 14-minute recording of Riley laying out every lie she'd built her life on, he might have swallowed the words before they left his mouth. I didn't confront him that night, but the sentence followed me home like a shadow. 2 days later, Riley accidentally proved something she never meant to reveal when she sent me an email that wasn't meant for me. A neat little note about how she would guide Grandma Agnes through the estate decisions so things don't get messy. And I read it twice because the tone wasn't concern. It was calculation. She had no idea I already knew she wasn't the respected physical therapist she bragged about being. And she definitely didn't know her words were confirming exactly what I suspected about why she'd been visiting Agnes so often. By the time I closed the email, I understood she wasn't just polishing her image. She was positioning herself to take everything. I'm not someone who chases drama, but I am someone who notices patterns. And Riley had been repeating the same moves for years, smiling sweetly while shifting blame, telling stories that crumbled the moment anyone checked the facts, wrapping herself in admiration she hadn't earned. When I looked at that email and remembered the smug way she'd waved off questions about her job last Thanksgiving, I realized the recording I held wasn't just proof, it was the only leverage I had left. And if I didn't use it soon, Riley would rewrite the entire family's future before anyone even realized a pen was in her hand. I ran into one of Riley's former classmates outside a cafe in Austin the week after that email. And when she smiled and said, "So how's your sister handling all those long therapy shifts?" I told her I wasn't sure. Which made her pause before saying that Riley had never made it past the first semester and had been working the front desk of a clinic in Albuquerque ever since. The way she said, "I figured your family knew," settled into my stomach like a stone because it lined up too neatly with every time Riley had brushed off questions by claiming she was exhausted from treating patients. By the time I reached my car, I already knew I needed to check something I had avoided for years. I opened my laptop that night and called my father under the pretense of helping him review his beneficiary information. And when he read off the last 4 digits of his retirement account, I typed them in and told him I'd call him back once I confirmed the settings. The screen loaded slowly, then showed me a list of withdrawals that didn't belong there. And I whispered, "Dad, did you move anything recently?" Even though I already knew the answer before he said no. The dates lined up with the nights Riley used to mention her double shifts. And the pattern was too clean to dismiss. I spent an hour tracing each transfer until the total climbed past $41,700. And the number didn't shock me as much as the realization that she'd counted on none of us ever looking closely. I sat there staring at the screen until my eyes blurred. And when I finally leaned back, I said out loud, "She's been draining them for years." Because saying it made it real in a way the spreadsheet alone couldn't. It wasn't just the money. It was how easily she'd hidden it behind the image everyone was so eager to believe. And the evidence sat in front of me like an open confession waiting for someone to finally read it. Riley showed up at my apartment the following Thursday with a bottle of Pinot Grigio and a bright, practiced smile. And when she said, "I figured you wanted to clear the air before Santa Fe," I told her I did. Though what I really wanted was her relaxed enough to stop choosing her words. We sat at my small kitchen table while she looked around and said, "You've made this place work," in the same tone she used when she pretended to compliment a haircut she didn't like. And I let her talk through her usual stories until she poured herself a second glass. By the time she reached for the third, my phone was already recording from the counter behind me, catching every shift in her voice. I eased her toward the subject by mentioning that I'd run into someone from her old program. And she laughed too loudly before saying, "Those people exaggerate everything. I left because the hospital needed me faster than the school could move." I asked her what kind of patients she was handling lately, And she launched into a description of treating a shoulder injury so detailed it sounded memorized rather than lived, which made it easier to say, "It's funny, because they thought you never finished." Without drawing my voice tight, she stared at me for a beat, then shrugged and said, "I didn't finish. But it doesn't matter when everyone already sees me as the one holding this family together." The wine loosened her even further, and she leaned back as if settling into a story she'd told herself for years, saying, "Mom trusts me with everything, even their accounts, because she knows I won't screw it up like you would." I kept my tone level when I asked what she meant, and she waved her hand and said, "I've been moving small amounts for them. Nothing dramatic. They'd thank me if they understood how much I juggle." When I asked if Agnes knew about these withdrawals, Riley smirked and said, "Agnes is easy. She believes whoever shows up with soup and a tired smile." And the words came out so casually that I knew she had no idea what she'd just given me. She didn't notice how still I'd gone when she added, "Once Grandma finalizes everything, all this stress will finally pay off." Because she was too busy pouring the last of the bottle, I let her talk until her sentences softened at the edges and she said, "You don't get it. Maddie, they expect me to run the show." "So I do." As if the weight she carried was noble rather than something she'd built herself. When she finally drifted toward the couch, still insisting, "You should be grateful I handle the hard parts." I reached for my phone and stopped the recording, knowing those 14 minutes had captured more honesty than Riley had ever meant to spill. I sent the recording to Aunt Meredith the next morning with a short message asking her to call when she had a minute. And when she picked up and said, "Tell me what I'm hearing," I walked her through every confession Riley had poured into my kitchen air. She let out a slow breath before saying, "You can't bring this to your parents first. Diana will shield her no matter how clear the facts are." And the certainty in her voice came from years of watching the same pattern play out. I didn't argue because she was right. And the recording on my phone was the first thing that didn't leave room for interpretation. That afternoon, an envelope from Santa Fe arrived with Agnes's handwriting on the front. And inside was a note that read, "Be at the Cultural Center on the 19th. There are decisions I want the whole family present for." I read it twice, remembering how Riley had bragged about steering Agnes's choices. And the timing made it obvious that this meeting wasn't something she would let pass quietly. Holding the letter, I understood that showing up wasn't enough. I had to be prepared to end the silence she had counted on. I sat at my kitchen table that night, replaying Riley's voice until the words settled into something sharp enough to move me. And when I finally closed the file, I said, "I'm bringing this with me. Not because I wanted a scene, but because pretending any longer would leave Agnes unprotected." Packing the flash drive felt strangely simple after that. A small act that matched the truth I already knew I couldn't walk away from. By the time I zipped my bag, the decision was done. Whatever happened in Santa Fe, the recording would be heard. Families filled the hall at the Cultural Center long before I walked in. And when Diana spotted me, she gave a tight smile before saying, "Try not to make today complicated." As if my presence alone threatened the order she wanted Riley to shine in. Riley arrived moments later in a tailored dress and announced, "Grandma asked me to speak first. So let's get everyone settled." And the room shifted with the kind of easy approval she'd been fed her whole life. I sat near the back, close enough to see the podium but far enough that no one bothered to mask their surprise that I'd come at all. When the conversations quieted, Diana introduced Riley with a warm, practiced tone, saying, "Our girl has carried the family in ways most people never see." And Riley stepped forward, already nodding as if accepting an award. She began detailing nights she claimed to have spent treating patients. And her voice softened on the line, "Sometimes you don't realize how much people need you until they say it out loud." A sentiment so polished it reminded me of the scripted confession I'd heard in my kitchen. A few relatives murmured admiration, unaware how those same words had once cracked under wine and carelessness. Robert followed with a folded sheet of paper he kept smoothing between his hands. And he read, "We're grateful to have a daughter so committed to service," before glancing toward Riley like he needed her approval to continue. Someone at the front asked brightly, "And what about Maddie?" which made Diana answer for him, saying, "She's still doing accounting somewhere." And the lightness in her tone dismissed years I'd carved out on my own. Riley lowered her eyes with a sympathetic tilt that didn't reach her mouth. The same gesture she'd used for years to pretend she wasn't enjoying the contrast. Agnes was escorted to her seat as the applause faded. And when Riley bent beside her to whisper, "I'll help you through everything today," the words floated back to me with the same cadence she'd used when bragging in that email she'd meant for someone else. Agnes looked past her and gave me a small nod that wasn't approval or invitation. It was acknowledgement that she saw more than the room assumed she did. As the projector warmed for the slideshow, Riley had insisted on narrating. I slipped the flash drive into my palm, knowing the moment she finished speaking would be the last time the family heard her without the truth layered beneath her voice. Riley finished her slideshow with a soft smile and said, "And that's why I'm proud of the work I do," as if the room owed her its gratitude. And the applause rose quickly because no one expected anything else. When she stepped aside for Agnes, Diana whispered, "Let her guide the announcements. She's earned it." And Riley nodded with a gracious tilt that barely hid her anticipation. I stood then, feeling the flash drive warm in my hand, and said, "Before Grandma speaks, there's something the family needs to hear," which made Diana straighten, so sharply, she asked, "Madeline, what are you doing?" in a voice meant to stop me. I walked to the podium without answering, and the rustling in the room settled into a curious hush as I held up the flash drive and said, "Riley helped me understand a few things last week. I think you should hear them in her own words." Riley's voice broke first when she said, "You're not playing anything. This is not the place." And she reached toward the cord as if she could yank the entire moment backward. An event attendant near the wall said, "Ma'am, please return to your seat," which forced her to freeze mid-step, her fury visible in the way she gripped the edge of a chair she hadn't meant to touch. I plugged in the drive and pressed play, and Riley's recorded voice floated through the speakers with an ease that betrayed how freely she had confessed. Starting with, "I didn't finish the program. I just let everyone think I did." A few relatives looked around as if expecting someone to laugh. But her next line, "I only need to sound tired for Mom to believe I'm coming off a double shift," landed hard enough to silence even the shuffling of feet. Diana whispered, "That's not her," though she knew it was. And the contradiction clung to the air between us. The recording moved to the withdrawals. And Riley's tipsy certainty filled the hall. "I've been moving small amounts for years. They'll never notice." Which made Robert's face go pale as he whispered, "Maddie asked me about those transfers," with a disbelief that folded his voice in half. Riley tried again to stand, saying, "This is twisted." She edited it. And I answered quietly, "You said every word in my kitchen," because the truth didn't need force to be heard. No one reached to help her sit. The air around her felt too fragile to touch. When the final line played once, Grandma signs everything over. "It'll all pay off." Riley's expression collapsed into something she couldn't rearrange. And Agnes rose slowly, bracing herself on the arm of her chair before saying, "I asked for this family meeting because I suspected something wasn't right." Riley murmured, "Grandma, please." But Agnes lifted a hand and said, "I trusted whoever showed up at my door. I see now that trust was misplaced." The words didn't echo. They settled like something long overdue. Agnes turned toward the room and said, "My estate will be revised on Monday. Riley's share will be held in a trust she can access only after repaying every dollar withdrawn from her parents' account and proving steady." Legitimate employment. Diana said, "You don't have to do this." But Agnes answered, "I have to do exactly this," with a steadiness that made the room still. When she looked at me and said, "Thank you for bringing the truth when others wouldn't," I felt the weight of the moment shift. Not toward triumph, but toward something clearer. Riley tried one last time to salvage the image she'd worn like armor, saying, "She set me up. None of you understand how she twists things." But the room no longer followed her script, and even the sympathy she sought couldn't find a place to land. I stood beside the podium without adding more, letting the silence settle around what had been revealed. Because the recording had already spoken with a completeness no interruption could dilute. By the time the attendants resumed adjusting the equipment, the family's attention had moved not to the slideshow waiting behind me, but to the simple fact that the story Riley had built could not exist beside the truth anymore. Robert found me in the hallway after most of the family had drifted toward the parking lot. And he stood there with his hands pressed against his pockets before saying, "I should have asked more questions when you called about the account." As if the admission itself cost him something he wasn't used to giving. I told him I hadn't expected him to catch what Riley had worked so hard to hide. And he exhaled once before saying, "I'm sorry. Maddie, I didn't want to see what was right in front of me." A sentence that landed heavier than he probably meant it to. We didn't hug. But the distance between us eased in a way that felt like a door cracking open rather than closing. 3 days later, Diana called with a voice that sounded scraped thin around the edges. And before I could speak, she said, "I didn't know she'd gone that far," which was the closest thing to an apology she'd ever offered me. I told her I needed time. And she whispered, "I understand," though I could hear the disbelief in the pause that followed, as if she had expected me to fall back into the role I'd always played. The call ended quietly, and I set the phone down, knowing the silence afterward belonged to me, not her. Riley didn't reach out at all. I only heard from a cousin that she'd left Albuquerque the morning after Santa Fe, muttering something about starting fresh somewhere else, as if geography could rewrite the words she had poured into my kitchen air. The family group thread stayed unusually still, punctuated only by messages about Agnes meeting with her attorney to finalize the revisions she'd announced. Nothing in the updates surprised me. But the steadiness of the decisions told me that the room had understood far more than Riley had ever intended them to. Agnes asked me to stay in Santa Fe for a few days. And when I arrived at her house, she handed me a spare key and said, "There's a place for you here anytime." Without ceremony or expectation. We spent the evening in her living room while she brewed tea and talked about small things. Not because she avoided the larger truths, but because she knew I needed quiet more than analysis. When she finally touched my hand and said, "You carried the truth when no one else could," I felt something inside me settle in a way I hadn't realized it was still waiting for. I returned to Austin a week later and unpacked slowly, letting the calm stretch into the space that used to feel tight around my ribs. And for the first time in years, I didn't brace myself for someone else's version of me. The recording was still saved on my phone. Not as a weapon, but as a line I'd crossed back toward myself. And I understood that whatever came next wouldn't be defined by Riley's voice. By the time I sat down on my couch that night, the quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. By the time I closed the door that night, the quiet felt like something I could finally settle into. And I found myself grateful for everyone who stayed with me through the unraveling of this story. If any part of it echoed something in your own life, I hope you'll share your thoughts so we don't walk these moments alone. Thank you for listening and for giving me a place to lay this truth down.